Mr. Mauno Koivisto, born in November 1923 in the southwestern Finnish coastal city of Turku and still living, is a Finnish retired politician who served as the 9th President of Finland from 1982 to 1994. He also served as Prime Minister from 1968 to 1970 and from 1979 to 1982, as the Finnish Finance Minister from 1966 to 1967 and in 1972, and as the Governor of the Finnish Central Bank from 1967 to 1982, although of course when he was serving as Finance Minister or as Prime Minister he could not actively lead the Bank of Finland. He was born into the family of Mr. Juho Koivisto, a carpenter at the Crichton Balkan shipyard, and housewife Hymni Sofia Eskola, who died when he was 10 years old. After attending primary school, he had a number of jobs, and when the Winter War started in 1939, he was 16 years old and joined a field firefighting unit. During the Continuation War from 1941 to 1944, he served in the infantry detachment Törni, led by the famous Mr. Lauri Törni, later known as Larry Thorne, in the United States, which was a reconnaissance detachment operating behind the enemy lines and open to selected volunteers only. During the war, he received the Order of the Cross of Liberty, 2nd class, and was promoted to the rank of Lance Corporal. He later referred to his experiences during the war by stating, "When you have taken part in a game in which your own life is at stake, all other games are small after that experience." After the war, he worked as a carpenter and joined the Social Democratic Party. In the autumn of 1948, he began to work at the Turku harbor, and in December 1948 he was appointed manager of the Harbor Labor Office of Turku, a post he held until 1951. From 1951 to 1953 he worked as a substitute classroom teacher at 2 southwestern Finnish schools. He passed his intermediate examination completing secondary school as an adult student in 1947 and his university entrance examination in 1949. He graduated as a Master of Arts and a Licentiate of Arts in 1953, intending to become a sociologist. 3 years later, he completed his doctoral thesis about social relations in the Turku dockyards. He also served as a vocational counselor of the city of Turku and as a member of the Turku City Council. In 1957, he became a banker with the Helsinki Workers' Savings Bank, serving as general manager from 1959 to 1968. And then in 1968, he was appointed as chairman of the board of the Bank of Finland. He tried to improve the Social Democratic Party's connections to communists and to Finland's longest-serving president, Mr. Urho Kekkonen. By 1979, there was an increasing dissatisfaction with the aging President Kekkonen, whose failing health was becoming difficult to conceal, and the lack of change. Koivisto, who had already since the early 1970s been, according to the opinion polls, one of the most popular candidates to succeed President Kekkonen, was appointed Prime Minister. He had continued to have high ratings in the opinion polls and was expected to be a future presidential candidate. In the first months of 1981, Kekkonen began to regret Koivisto's appointment as Prime Minister and to lean towards the side of those who wanted to get rid of him, or, according to, for example, Kekkonen's official biographer, the historian Juhani Suomi, Kekkonen wanted Koivisto to start making political decisions a lot more decisively and quickly. In April 1981, Koivisto, however, managed to keep his squabbling government together and to give to the Finnish Parliament for consideration long overdue legislative proposals. And the Finnish historians, political scientists and journalists still debate whether President Kekkonen really wanted to dismiss Koivisto as prime minister, or whether Kekkonen just wanted to speed up Koivisto's ponderous and slow decision-making, or whether this government crisis was just a part of the ruthless presidential game that top politicians such as Koivisto, foreign minister and the centrist leader at the time, Mr. Paavo Väyrynen, the social democratic chairman, Mr. Kalevi Sorsa, acting governor of the Bank of Finland, Mr. Ahti Karjalainen, and the parliamentary speaker, Mr. Johannes Virolainen, were playing. In September 1981, Kekkonen's health finally failed, so much that he could no longer exercise his duties, and in accordance with the Finnish constitution, Prime Minister Koivisto became acting president. In late October, Kekkonen signed his resignation letter, and early presidential elections were set for January 1982, which Koivisto easily won, having obtained about 43% of the popular vote and 145 electors, and then already on the first ballot, he was elected president, receiving 167 of the 301 votes. His closest rival, the centre-right National Coalition Party's presidential candidate, Mr. Harri Holkeri, got only 58 votes. Koivisto began the 30-year uninterrupted period of social democratic Finnish presidents. He kept a low profile as president and used less authoritarian leadership tactics than Kekkonen had, refraining from using some of his presidential powers and initiating a new era of parliamentarism in Finland. He sometimes did have a difficult relationship with journalists, whom he famously called lemmings. One practical problem was that quite a few reporters had trouble interpreting President Koivisto's deeply pondering and philosophical statements. In the critical moments when the Soviet Union was collapsing and the Baltic countries, particularly Estonia, were declaring themselves independent, President Koivisto referred to the policy of neutrality and avoided publicly supporting the independence movement, but its members were allowed to work from inside Finland. Koivisto's Finland recognized the new Estonian government only after the major powers had done so, and also the Finnish government re-recognized as independent countries Latvia and Lithuania in August 1991. He made two bold unilateral diplomatic moves that significantly changed the Finnish political position. In 1990, after Germany was reunified, he unilaterally renounced the terms of the Paris Peace Treaty in 1947, which had limited the strength and armament of the Finnish defense forces. The other move was the renunciation of the Finnish-Soviet Treaty of 1948, officially known as the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance, on which Finland's official policy of neutrality was largely based. In 1991, concurrently with the fall of the Soviet Union. The treaty, the military article of which had shaped Finnish foreign policy for decades, was substituted with a new treaty without military obligations in 1992. In 1990, partly motivated by nationalism, partly by the fear of the declining workforce, Koivisto proposed that any Soviet citizen with either Finnish or Ingrian ancestry be enabled to immigrate to Finland as a returnee. The proposal resulted in a modification of immigration law to this end even during the same year. He was easily re-elected in 1988, having received about 48% of the direct votes and having been elected on the second round of voting with 189 electors out of 301 supporting him. In 1991, he ratified the changes to the Finnish constitution that began the parliamentarization of presidential powers, limiting the president to 2 successive terms, that is a total of 12 years, taking away from him the unlimited right to dissolve parliament and call new elections, and clarifying that he could no longer dismiss either the government or an individual minister without either a parliamentary vote of no confidence or the government's or the minister's own request, or in the case of an individual minister, without the prime minister's proposal. His popularity sharply declined during Finland's economic depression of the early 1990s because many unemployed, otherwise impoverished, and even employed citizens believed that he could have and even should have forced the centre-right government of Prime Minister Esko Aho to stimulate the economy and give many unemployed people temporary public sector jobs. In 1992, he initiated the process of Finnish accession to the European Community, now known as the European Union. The final terms of membership agreement were finalized on the day when Koivisto left office, that is on March the 1st, 1994. In retirement, he published 4 volumes of his memoirs and continued to comment on economics in both domestic and international politics. In 2009, he declined to apologize to Estonia that his administration did not support the independence of Estonia. In March 2010, he was hospitalized for cardiac dysrhythmia but was released less than a week later. And as of today, August the 4th, 2012, he is the longest-lived Finnish president, having lived for 88 years and more than 8 months.